Now, Professor Nomalanga Mkhize is a historian from the Nelson Mandela University. She joins us live to expand on some of these concerns which have been raised. Professor, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, hundreds of people from the Khoi and San community took to the streets, launching their grievances. What is the significance of this march if we try and take a look at whether or not it echoes past indigenous resistance movements?
Well, the issue here really goes back to how we recognize two things. One is, how far back should we take land claims? And how do we deal with the dispossession of colored South Africans? I'm sorry, my bandwidth might be a bit of a problem, but you can let me know if you can hear me.
We can hear you, yes.
Yes. So the issue of land, the fact that our law really only allows us to recognize 1913 actually does a disservice to particularly people in the Western Cape, Northern Cape, and parts of the Eastern Cape. Mm-hmm. These are people whose ancestors were dispossessed 400 years ago. So if we are not able to take cognizance of that, then we're going to keep having these contestations. On top of that, many of their descendants came to be classified as colored, so they were not considered native, whereas in fact, that was terrible because they were actually the descendants of the oldest inhabitants of Southern Africa, many of them.
So you're saying that from a historical perspective, there is, precedent for this kind of custodianship?
Well, no, the struggle is that our current laws only recognize land dispossession in the 20th century, whereas the first line of indigenous people who had occupied Southern Africa for at least 50,000 years lost their land in the 1600s. And they were dispossessed not just of land, but also of identity. So they were called Hottentot. So they were not considered Africans pretty much thereafter, once they then became seen as, mixed race, bastard, as colored. So we have a problem in that our whole legal framework fails to recognize that.
And how much of a shift needs to happen here? I mean, we've just heard some of the leaders there speaking to, the issue is not the Constitution, it's perhaps the implementation of what the Constitution entails. No,
we're going to need a seismic shift because you have to understand, imagine if you have to look at the history of how, in particular, the San people of the Western Cape were hunted down, dispossessed, not just in the Western Cape, all the way into KwaZulu-Natal, Lesotho. To be a San person meant to be a hunted person. Now, if you look at it from that point, you're not looking at a genocide. So if you're looking at a genocide, what is the type of legal restitution and framework that you need for the descendants of people of those communities to make their land claims, their identity claims, as well as their leadership claims today? Because currently, the leadership claims are favoring, let's just say, the Africans whose nations were not as fragmented. But if you look at particularly the San and the Khoi, they suffered for 200 years before anybody was dispossessed. On top of all of that, they were the first people to be issued with passes in the 1800s. So where do you put the mark to really decide how to restitute people? If you can't start there at the very beginning, at that original crime against San and Khoi people, it means you can't do restitution properly in this country because you're not recognizing how long ago the crimes against them were committed. Today, many of them are called colored. It's not only colored who are their descendants, but many are colored in the Western Cape in particular, and the Northern Cape, and in parts of the Northwest.
What consequences or perhaps risks might arise if these grievances continue to be overlooked by government? Yeah, you still with us?
Sorry, I've got another guest coming over the audio.
Okay, no, you're definitely still with us. So just looking at some of the consequences or risk factors if these grievances continue to be overlooked by government.
Yes. Well, you can already see that you've got so many splinters happening. So you really going to find yourself with a much more tense concept of who is indigenous. You're going to find yourself with a very tense concept of who should be a leader amongst the Khoi and the San. Government is almost leaving this thing as if it doesn't matter, whereas it's the government that needs to set up and actually act quickly on the claims that people are making and make sure that those who have the kinds of claims that are within the community recognized can actually make those claims. As with any other indigenous group in this country, the state makes a mechanism and then acts fast. Right now, what's been happening is they've been dragging the issue and not resolving it, because it's almost as if they think that anything Khoi and San is almost marginal and sectarian, whereas it's actually foundational to understanding how South Africa is in the deep problems that it is today. I often say the problems you see in the Western Cape, particularly in the colored community, are foundational to all problems in South Africa, because for those first 200 years, all those indigenous people in the Western Cape were the front line of dispossession and resistance against colonization. Absolutely. And they had been in this land for, many of those communities over 50,000 years, and then others, of course, migrating up and down from Namibia, etc. But if the government doesn't deal with it, it really will actually create a very divisive question around indigeneity, land, and who has claims as an African in South Africa.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening and giving us that context. Professor Nomalanga Mkhize, a historian from the Nelson Mandela University.